There we go.
And there are 19 participants.
Good,
So that's great.
good, good, good. Oh,
Oh, no, there's more.
37,
Yeah.
38. Good, they're able to get in. Good, good, good.
Okay. And they can hear us, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay.
So welcome everybody to tonight's webinar on container planting. We've got some really good presenters to talk to you tonight. And the first one up on the docket is Dan Hendrickson. He's a retired music educator, a plant geek. He's in good company tonight, and a member of the American Primrose Society, the North American Rock Garden Society, and the Great Lakes chapter of the Rock Garden Society. In the summer, he lives on the eastern shore of the Keweenaw Peninsula, and his gardens include numerous rock garden specimens, dwarf conifers, primrose species, and hybrids, as well as other choice woodlanders. You're going to have a visual treat seeing what he's got to show you tonight. Dan, take it away.
Thanks. And thanks, Ruth, Vicki, and Jackie and Jill for including me in this webinar. Containers are very much a part of my gardening experience, and I'm going to talk just a little bit first about how I use them. And as you can see in this first slide, I use them to display very unique or what I consider special plants. And frequently that means they're rock garden plants or alpine plants. So this first planter, which is actually an old mining crucible from our area, from the CMH mine. My partner Stephen's grandfather was a chemist that actually worked for CMH, and they used these crucibles for testing the copper ores. And when they became damaged, he would take them home and he would use them as planters. Well, fortunate for me, I'm now able to use them as planters, and they really make wonderful containers. So this first slide actually has 3 different species of Lewisia in it. The grassy looking one is a Lewisia pygmaea. If you can see my pointer, that's Lewisia cantilevii, and then there's a hybrid Lewisia. The mossy looking thing is an Arenaria. That's a classic rock garden plant. And then the plant to the left on the top is a saxifraga. I use a variety of containers. This slide is showing from the left, actually one of those half of a mining crucible. And next to it is the tub from an old washing machine. Below that is a concrete culvert that I found at the local green waste. There's a terracotta planter that I use as a trough or as a planter as well. In the middle is a sandstone container that Stephen's grandfather built. And to the right of that is another mining crucible, half of a mining crucible. On the right is a metal tube of some sort. I don't know what it was used for, but I use it for planting Western penstemons in it. Just below that is a metal tray that has a bunch of succulents in it. It's not the greatest picture. You can see I have a bunch of pots in it. It needs to be repotted. So you can to see some of my mess. In the very center is a hypertufa trough that was built by Esther and Robert Benedict. They have a specialty nursery in Napanee, Indiana, and I purchased that from them. So in the next slide, you're actually going to see one of the special little plants that's growing in that particular trough. This is Primula scotica. It's a primula that grows in Scotland and the Orkney Islands, and I obtained seed from the American Primrose Society and grew that from seed. It's a wonderful little plant. I also use chimney liners as planters. So in this photo here, in my spring garden, amongst the primroses and some of the trilliums and other woodlanders, you can see the chimney liners have dwarf conifers in them. And in this slide, there are 2 sinks. Again, Stephen's grandfather took these old sinks and put sandstone facings on them. They weigh a ton, so once you plant them, you have to make sure you have them where you want them because they're just about impossible to move. And again, I have a number of specialized plants in them. In the next slide, here you can see Gentiana acaulis. Just to the right of it, you can see another example of that little Primula scotica. You can also see all the maple seedlings that I've never pulled out. We have lots of maple trees surrounding the cottage. And then in the background is mossy saxifragum. This is a grouping of the mining crucibles. I think they form a really nice pattern, and each one of them has a different collection of plants that I'm not going to talk about now because there's not enough time. Mainly, I'm trying to show you how I'm using containers in my gardening. This is a Townsendia perryi, one of the specializable plants in that grouping. So for this event, I think we agreed that we were each going to plant 3 containers or something to that effect. I made my containers. These are hypertufa troughs. Hypertufa is an attempt to make something look like tufa. I'm going to forward this. The rocks here on the left in this slide are actually tufa. And tufa is basically calcium carbonate, and it forms from springs bubbling up or at river mouths or lakes. And it's very porous. And you can actually drill into it and you can plant it. And if you have plants that are lime lovers, they thrive in those sorts of conditions. So when you make hypertufa, it's a combination of peat moss, perlite, and cement and some synthetic fibers to strengthen it. You use the perlite because it helps to make the containers lighter. They're not as heavy as if you were making just actual concrete. So I planted the 3 outer troughs that you're seeing here in this slide. You can see I've got a collection of some plants on the side. I have a variety of alpine plants and primulas, little dwarf treasures that I'm planting in my troughs. I always put screening on the bottom of the trough to help keep insects out and, of course, to keep the potting mix in the container. And of course, drainage is important. This potting mix is a special potting mix that I got from Benedict's Nursery. It's actually a green roofing mix that they get from a company in Indianapolis. It's very gritty, has very sharp drainage, and it works really well for a number of alpine plants. One of the first plants that I put into the container is Primula allioni, and what I usually do is I break the plant up and bare root them so that I'm not introducing insects or other problems into the container. I would normally rinse this off. This was actually planted in the exact same potting soil as what's going into the trough, so I didn't rinse it, so it doesn't look as clean as it normally would. As you can see, I've got 5 divisions from this plant, which is nice, because then 3 of them I will actually plant into the container, and then 2 more of them I can repot and save for later or for another container, or I can share with somebody else. I always label my plants so that I can track them, and I basically use plastic labels that I then place close to the plant. And now you can see the primrose here. I have 3 of the divisions actually planted into the mix, planting label next to it. Next slide, I've buried the planting label so you're not seeing it. There's still a little bit showing, just enough to show me where it is, but not enough to be in your visual field. This is my favorite planting tool. It's an old butter knife. It really works well for getting into tight little crevices and tight little places. And it's cheap. Didn't cost me a cent. So now I've added more plants. I now have approximately 4 primroses in the planter, along with a Soldanella alpina, which is a very nice little rock garden plant. And I'm going to top dress the planter with a slate mulch. This is a mulch that I found at a nursery downstate. Unfortunately, in our area here, we don't have a lot of landscaping places that have a lot of variety in the mulches that they offer. So I frequently have to go somewhere else, travel distances to find things that work for the things I'm doing. In this case, I found this in Freeland at a landscaping place in Freeland. And what I've done with this, it's basically slate, is I've created what I call a pseudo crevice garden. Crevice gardens are all the rage in the rock garden world right now, as well as you can go to a number of botanical gardens in the US and Canada, and they're all building crevice gardens. What they do is they replicate the environment and the conditions of mountaintops, deserts, coastlines, and other exposed rocky places. And what they do is they provide perfect conditions for the native plants that actually grow in those conditions. Well, in this case, I'm just recreating the look of the crevices because I really like the look. I'm not doing it for the function that the crevices actually provide to the plants. The plants will do just fine in the potting soil that they're in. So this just adds a visual element to the planting. And there you see the finished product. There's actually a few more plants in there than the primroses. Down on the right, there's a little globularia, and there's an Andracece over to the left, in addition to the primroses and the Solnamella. The second pot, I use a different potting soil because the plants that I'm putting in have a different requirement. So this potting soil is actually a mixture of peat moss, composted leaves, and chicken grit, all in an equal ratio. It still has fairly sharp drainage because of the chicken grit, which is important. I'm planting it with a dwarf conifer. In this case, it's Tsuga canadensis, or it's a dwarf hemlock. In 10 years, if you can read the label, it says it's only supposed to be about 1 foot by 1.5 feet. So it's really not going to grow very fast, and it's not going to get very large. I suspect that after 3 or 4 years, I will probably repot it into a slightly larger pot. But for the time being, it should be happy in the pot that I'm putting it into. I'm using chicken grit and crushed mine rock. We have a lot of mine rock in this area. That is one of the things that you can get at the landscaping places. You can get a black crushed pine rock. In this case, it's red. I prefer the red. It actually works better with the plantings and my rock garden, the things that I do. This is the finished product. I think it has a bonsai-like sort of look. Only 3 plants in it. On the left is an Arenaria. Again, that's a classic rock garden plant. It's kind of shy to bloom in cultivation, but I'm more interested in the mossy look that it creates in the planter. The little primrose on the bottom will look like this when it comes into bloom. That should happen for me, I hope, next spring. And then the large planter, I'm using the tufa rock in it, and I'm trying to mimic nature here, like the crevice gardens. I'm arranging the rocks to fall in a similar strata. The rocks actually do reach right down to the bottom of the planter, and the roots of the plants will actually, as I plant them, some of them will creep between the rocks, so it's actually beneficial to them. And at some point, I will probably actually drill into some of these and plant some other plants into them, but I haven't done that yet. This is actually a saxifraga that has been planted directly into the tufa. So the nursery that I got this from, which is Reitman's Alpine Nursery, and they're located in Canada, they literally drill into the tufa and then they plant the little saxifraga cutting right into that tufa, and they thrive in that sort of condition. So this is it planted in the planter, and I've push the actual soil in the planter right up to it, because I'm hoping then that the saxifrage will now root into that soil, and it will create more plants for me, which I can then use in other pots, or I can share with other people. And that little saxifrage will look like this one. It's a wonderful little plant. So this is that container completely planted, and I'll just very quickly go around. On the top, you can see my arrow is a primula. It's Primula Peter Klein. It's a smaller primula. To the right is one of those saxifrages that's embedded in the tufa. Just below that is another primula, Primula allioni. To the left of that is a dwarf spirea that will not get any larger. It will probably be the largest plant in this planting, but it will get about 9 inches tall, and it has beautiful little pink flowers. Over to the right, there's another saxifraga that's embedded in the tufa. To the left of that is another Soldanella alpina. To the right, the primula. Moving clockwise, here is a Claytonia megarrhiza, which is a western version of our spring beauty. It's a succulent plant that should do really well in this container plant. To the left of that is another saxifraga embedded in the tufa. Below that, again, another saxifraga. To the left, another Primula allionii. Above that, in between these two large pieces of tufa, is an Androsace, or a rock jasmine. Has beautiful little pinkish white flowers. And to the left of that is another saxifraga. And above that is a dwarf Chemiciferous, or false cypress. It's another dwarf conifer that will not get very large. I'm guessing in 10 years at most, it will be 6 to 8 inches. So
Dan?
it will stay small.
Dan, I hate
Yes.
to be the bad guy because this is fascinating, but your 15 minutes are up. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
people are going to have some questions for you. So I
Absolutely.
would like to encourage them to put them in the Q&A at the bottom of their screen. And
Right.
then after Jill and Jackie have spoken, we'll take all the questions and
All right.
go on with that. And we'll go from there. Okay, the next up is Jill Fisher. And she has a bachelor's and master's degree from Michigan State. Bachelor's is in botany, master's is in forest ecology. She has worked for the Nature Conservancy in both Michigan and Florida. She worked for 10 years for MTU's Ecosystem Science Center. She worked for KISMA, and she has been working for the Keweenaw Land Trust since 2018. Jill, please go ahead.
Right. Well, thank you. So I was having trouble with my screen share, so I hope that looks good to everybody. I'm just gonna have to keep it in this mode. Does that seem all right? All right, okay. I apologize. We just moved our office. We're in a brand new place and things are still a little discombobulated over here. So one thing, I completely forgot about Jackie's very good suggestion that we each talk about 3-potted containers. And so I was thinking that I should really focus on my talk on the functionality of using containers in your yard and your gardens, because my husband and I also just moved. So I'm discombobulated both at home and at work. And I really relied on containers. I had to rely on containers this summer because we left our 20 years gardens behind and we were moving to a brand new place. So I wanted to have you think about not only the beautiful design like Dan showed us, but the actual function of what using containers can do for you. So first of all, you can grow plants that you can't grow in your soil due to either texture, like Dan referred to. These alpine plants need certain very porous soils, or time, which was my case because I didn't have the time to get them set up to put them in the right spot. And this picture here is also another example of a container garden that you can't really do unless you have a pond, but you could have a pond in a container. So either your soil or your time. So here's an example. Last spring, when we were busy getting ready to move, I had these old wash tubs and I had some of these old canners, and I could plant garlic in those last spring. And then, or last fall, I'm sorry, and they were growing and taking up some space, and they were getting ready to harvest my garden. And I went to a garden museum and I found one little 4-inch pot that had about 15 basil plants in it. The poor little things were all crowded each other out, really competing with each other, and it was only $1. So even if I had eaten all the basil in that pot, it would have been worth $1. But I took them home and I put them in these little pots as we were waiting for these garlic to harvest, right? I still had another couple weeks to go. Then I could harvest garlic out of these first 2 wash tubs, and I could plant the basil in their place and in other miscellaneous pots just to get them in the ground. And then here's the basil at the end of the summer. I'd already made pesto twice out of these things, so I'm going for a 3rd round here. And so I used the little pots to buy me time to put them in the bigger pots. I also found some asparagus starts, and I've not really seen asparagus starts very often in the garden centers as plugs, and I wasn't sure if I was going to see them again. So again, I was buying myself some time by just putting them in these ugly pots, but at least next year when I put them in the bed that I prepared, they'll be bigger. All right. This is, you've heard of themed gardens, right? This one was called the Anything Goes Garden because I had some botany, some old biology tubs from my husband. I had some of the cloth bags, which work really well. I had this bucket, was cracked. It looked ugly, but it held soil and I could grow potatoes in there. And then my husband had this really nice, big like cattle tank from, as leftover from research. So I could at least get started. And here are the potatoes at the end of the summer, and the zucchini, the Swiss chard. You can see that nothing was lacking for the fact that I just threw some soil in there and grew what I could where I could. So that was my example of using pots because I didn't have the right soil or the space for it or the time, right? My second example is to group pots together, as Dan was referring to, as a potscape, because you can create an instant garden anywhere that when you're using pots. And this was an example on Elevation Street. This person had vegetables. They had these beautiful flower gardens. This over here was the garden space that they had allocated to them, and that wasn't enough for them. So they could just keep on going with their pots. This is an example of my flower garden, my instant flower garden, and I used a collection of pots right by our steps to just add some color there. And here's another example by some other steps. This is the sunniest part of our yard, and so I used that space to monopolize the sun for the tomatoes that are in these big black pots that can capture a lot of the heat from the sun and grow better tomatoes. I find that, and other people could find different things, but I find that up here, growing tomatoes in pots warms them up faster and they get hotter, so we get better tomatoes where we are in the UP than if I had them in the ground. Same thing with the basil. A third function of using pots is that you can fill gaps in your bed, which can create a big impact. And some of the plants, like in my old yard, I had a beautiful Oriental poppy. The thing was gorgeous. I couldn't bring myself to get it out of there, but it was just kind of dramatic. I had this great big wahoo, and then it died and looked ugly the whole time it was dying, and it would die for a long time. It was the dramatic die-off. And so I learned that I could just plant a pot with beautiful plants. I could whack out the poppy because it kept coming back. I didn't have to make it come back even more vigorously. And then I could put a pot in its place. And this is another example that I got off of a website of here's an empty space in the front of the garden. You sure don't want that in such a visible spot. So you can use pots to like fill in those holes. Another function of using pots in your garden is to frame things. And here are some examples of 2 doorways. The one on the left, they're mimicking the colors of the house, right? They're just replicating that and emphasizing that color scheme. And the one in the middle, they're using different colors for different pops on that doorstep. And then garden gates, you know, or pathways. It's just a way of kind of formalizing some entrance. And then 5th, you can add color to spaces that need color. This is obviously a monochromic place that couldn't grow plants in that rocky soil, but look at this gorgeous collection of pots, and they're repeating several color themes here, and it just looks really nice. There can be places in your yard where it's not that great to grow things. You could rotate the pots so the plants can get out in the sun and then do okay in the shade. And then here again is just a wonderful repetition of color. And you've got some interesting colors with the leaves, this golden color being repeated. And then those yellow flowers just really bring that golden color out. And you can put color where you want it, when you want it. You can keep moving that around. So to sum up, what I wanted to have you think about with the functionality of containers is that you can use them to fill gaps or holes in your gardens. You can use them to frame doorways or pathways or call attention to things you want. You can use pots to add color where you want it, because the annuals are usually pretty colorful, and sometimes the perennials, at least in my yard, a lot of the perennials kind of wait to the end of the summer to have their big colorful party, and so the annuals really bring that color in early. You can grow plants that you can't grow in your own soil, as Dan so nicely showed us with all those alpine plants. You can group them together and have an instant garden, which is fun, and you can move that around, and it's very functional because it's so mobile. And then I added a 6th here that you can make use of interesting found objects. Again, Dan showed us some great examples from his family's history. And here's this bucket is looking great there. Here's some cute things that I found online. You know, these fryer baskets is kind of a fun idea. And then I loved this thematic garden. I don't have an old stove. I don't know if anyone has one out there, but I thought this was a great idea. I had a bunch of old coffee pots I was going to do something with, but I didn't want to move them, so now I have to collect more objects to put these in. So that is I'm at the end of mine, Jackie.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Jill, thank you.
Very cool. All right, let's see if I can get things going here. Share screen.
Okay, Jackie, you're up next. And of course, if you have questions for Jill or comments, please put them in the Q&A. Jackie is a member of the MMGA board. She's the organizer of tonight's webinar. She's a Master Gardener volunteer. She says she's been a rock landscaper with 40 years practice. And any of us that live in Northern Michigan can really identify with that. She's a member of the Keweenaw Wild Ones, the Keweenaw Garden Club, and MMGA. She's a retired Spanish teacher, and she tutors Spanish. She also writes, sings, and plays with the ukuleles. So take it away, Jackie.
Okay. Yay. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much, Dan and Jill. I've known these folks for quite some time. And I always get something from both of them. So thank you so much for being willing to share. My motivation is somewhat like Jill's, in that I moved after 30 years of living in the same place. And the place I moved to now doesn't have real great soil. Plus, I'm up in age, and also tilling, we've learned as master gardeners that it's not really the best thing for soil structure. It destroys it. So I built 3 raised beds in my backyard for some vegetables. And then I dug a couple of beds, but the containers I'm finding very practical. And so this is a wide composite pot. It's 22 inches in across, and it's 6 inches deep. So I started out by putting some scallions in there, and there's some cilantro. There's 2 kinds of basil, and there is in here somewhere a tiny little rosemary. I think it's back there. And so as the summer progressed, this is some weeks later, this is what it looks like. And I was able to make pesto, and I got some cilantro and chopped it up with, I believe I used some garlic and olive oil and put it in little ice cube trays to freeze it. And then I can bring it out and pop it in some eggs or something else that I like. And the onions were also good. Well, I like this container so much that I had another one, but I put in nasturtiums. And here's a little daisy-like plant that I can't remember. I didn't buy it, it was a gift. But I love nasturtiums because you can eat them. You can eat the blossoms, and they look pretty in a salad. And so I always try to have some, and that's now mature and lush. They all have holes in the bottom for drainage. I've had some containers that did not have holes in them, and I've drowned things. So it makes, I'd like Dan to at some point address what he does with like his mining crucibles, how he avoids drowning the plants. Maybe there's just so much material in there. I'm not sure, but I'd be interested to know what you do with that. So this is, these are some onion sets that I'm putting in another one. And just put them around, put them on my patio. So I have onions that I can snip off, and some rosemary, some basil, some cilantro. When I'm cooking, I don't have to go to the garden. I can just cut what I want. I really like that about having containers right on my patio. Down next to my raised beds, I got, I put a 4-foot radius there. It's a 10-inch deep fiber bag. I like them because the roots don't circle like they do in a regular pot. They just, grow all in. And you can reuse these bags. And if I reuse the smaller ones, this one I haven't moved since I put it there. It's pretty unwieldy, but I planted beans in there. And that shows you kind of how deep it is. There's, I put container soil in there, maybe some compost and some composted manure that I purchased. And let's see, there you go. Oops, there's some nice pole beans looking really healthy and happy. Another fiber sack. This one is 10 inches deep and 12 inches wide. And this is just an ugly old pot. I've got peppers in here. It's on a cart. It's on a rolling cart that I inherited. And I just roll it around the patios, keeping it in the sun, which I find, and then the animals aren't getting it up there. I like that. I like having something I can just go out and here's oops, there's the Hungarian sweets that are there. This is a tomato. I agree with Jill that tomatoes in containers get more warmth. You have to water them though. You have to water containers more than you do. You know, if you're getting plenty of rain, your garden's usually going to be okay. But if you're in a container, you have to check your soil. The other thing I used was a metal container to plant potatoes in. The idea was to put your sets in, and then as they start growing up, keep adding soil and keep the little green part just under the soil. And that way, by the time you get to the top, you are going to have more potatoes because you'll have more roots coming off the plant. Let's see, whoops. There it is in the garden. I didn't keep it up. I think the soil is probably right down to here. I got busy. So my yield, although it was, you know, decent, wasn't as fantastic as the YouTube video said it would be, but I had fun, and I did some in a coffee sack last year, and I felt real good about. I like that you don't have to dig them up; you just dump them out. That's real handy. So I did the big round composite pots, which I love for convenience, and then splashes the color around my patio, and the bags that I would recommend. They keep everything keeps the roots are happy when they're not, you know, circling round and round and round a conventional pot. And then planting in something like this metal container is kind of cool. So I think I've hit all the points. Mine was very practical. And I like the fact that even though Dan and Jill and I didn't talk about what we were going to do, that we all came at it from a little different point of view, and hopefully gave you some inspiration. And we're ready for questions.
Okay, in the questions, we have, from Karen Blewett. Does Dan put the pots away in a barn or shed for the winter?
No,
Dan?
I just place them on the ground and let the snow cover them.
And
I do-
Nancy Malinowski says, thanks for all the ideas that are truly innovative.
Tell Nancy.
And Jackie, Diana McGuire wants to know where you get your fiber sacks.
I actually got them at a feed and seed store that's about a mile away from where I live. It's a, you know, pet food and garden supply store called Erickson's in Houghton. I'm sure you could get them online, and I'm sure there are so many gardening places downstate that you should be able to get them.
Probably like a Blaine's Farm and Fleet or
Yeah, I
something
bet
like that.
if you Googled it, they'd have examples of where you could get them. But they
Okay.
come in various sizes.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add, Jackie, I've been growing seedlings of plants to plant out on Keweenaw Land Trust lands, and the way the roots grow in those bags is really handy because, like you said, they don't hit that plastic wall and then J-root. They hit this wall. It's called air pruning. So when they get to the cloth wall, the dryness stops them from going further, and they just kind of proliferate where they are. And so you get like a 360-degree better root ball. But I agree with Jackie about needing to water them, and Dan's concept of mulching. I really mulched those pots with like wood chips or something. Otherwise the soil moisture is just very up and down instead of steady.
I did I should have mentioned that I did mulch quite a bit. Necessary.
Okay, we have some extra time. So Dan, if there are some things you weren't able to finish up in your 15 minutes that you'd
Sure.
like to show us, I think this group would like to see them.
Sure.
Why don't you just go right ahead? And I'm going to mute again so my puppy isn't disturbing you.
So I'm just trying, excuse me, trying to find where I left off.
Yeah, that could have been it.
I think this is where we were at. I had identified all the plants that were in this particular trough. And then this slide is just showing that trough with top dressing. I actually took the tufa and used a sledgehammer to crush it so that I could create a gravel and actually some of it turned into a powder so that would actually match the tufa rocks that you're seeing there. And then placement, as Jill talked about placement and how you're placing things. I think a lot about placement of my plants and where I'm putting them. A lot of it has to do with the amount of light that they're receiving. We have a lot of maple trees where we're located. So placing them into my rock garden, parts of the rock garden get more sun, parts of it are a little more shaded. So I try to look at things from different angles. So you can see the two smaller pots that I had planted are now placed into the rock garden with other planters. And these are more of the mining crucibles that you're seeing. And Jackie asked about the drainage of the mining crucibles. They all had a hole, at least one hole in them when I started using them. But I actually used a ceramic drill bit and drilled a couple more holes in each of them just to make sure that there was adequate drainage. Of course, the problem I run into is because of the maples that we have, the roots will get up into the planters. So I also, when I actually embed them into the ground, I usually put a landscaping fabric of some sort to try to keep the roots out of the container. So far, it seems to be working. So I think this is the final slide, and you can see all the three containers that I planted are placed into the rock garden. Of course, this is a fall picture. I just took this picture last week. The leaves are dropping. A lot of the plants are dying back, but I think the planters have integrated well into what I already had there. I think the two in the front, the one over to the left, should do just fine there light-wise. It gets afternoon and late afternoon sun. The one to the right, likewise, light-wise, should do just fine there. The one in the back is the one I'm most concerned about. I think it's probably going to get too much shade. It really only gets early morning light. So I suspect that I may have to move that one to another location, but it's a wait and see. We'll see how it does. So I think that was yeah, that was the end.
That was great. All of you, thank you so much. Let me just double check. No, I do not see any additional questions. But if someone does have a question, raise your hand and we'll take it. We've got a few minutes left. And if not, thank you all very much. This recording, if you have friends who weren't able to listen tonight, will be on our website and we will send out a newsletter with a link to it sometime next week. Again, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jill. And Jackie, thank you for putting this together.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take